marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Monday, May 20th, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. Kirby is off, and for some strange reason, listeners, he has put me in charge. So you're going to have to put up with me for quite a bit. I think we've calculated that it's going to be around 15 or so hours this week. And so the Millennial Roundtable is expanding. The table is getting a little bit bigger, and we're so excited that you decided to join us on this Monday after the Game of Thrones that happened on Sunday night. But before we get to the Game of Thrones and how 10 million Americans are skipping out on work, we have got Jonathan Saenz on the phone with us today. Jonathan is the president of Texas Values, a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving and advancing a culture of family values in the state of Texas. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm great.
Oh, good to have you on. Good. So we're coming up on the very end. We're coming up on the end of the Texas Ledge. It's about to close down. What are some of the things that's happening in Austin right now, Jonathan?
Well, as a matter of fact, I just stepped out of the Texas House chamber because they are in the process of voting on the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill. Senate Bill 1978 is getting its last vote in the House. It passed the Senate last week. This is a bill that's now become response to what happened in San Antonio. The San Antonio government banned Chick-fil-A from opening up a store in the San Antonio airport because they gave charitable donations to the Salvation Army and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. The bill started out a little bit more broad, but has been molded largely because of that situation and because of threats to Chick-fil-A and other businesses like them across the country simply for charitable donations that they give. And so right now the House is voting on it. A bad amendment on that issue just got defeated that would have added sexual orientation, gender identity to the bill. That amendment went down 65-76. And so now they're getting very close to taking a final vote on the bill.
That's phenomenal. So what makes this bill so important for us when we continue to think about the understanding of how faith is supposed to have be able to thrive outside of our religious context? What's the significance of this bill for listeners to understand?
Well, look, I mean, for a long time, there's been attacks on traditional entities, individuals, organizations, and others because of their biblical views. So that's what the San Antonio government tried to do. They tried to punish Chick-fil-A because they gave charitable donations to Christian ministries. And so, this is not good for business. If you're going to start punishing businesses for charitable donations, you're going to start trying to shut them down. The government is. So we can't have the government discriminating against people based on their religious beliefs or based on them giving charitable donations to religious ministries. And we're talking about the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. If the government starts shutting businesses down because they give charitable donations to entities like the Salvation Army, that poses a concern for a lot of people. And you got businesses like Walmart and others that give money to the Salvation Army. And so, but it's also about government accountability. Okay. It's clear to a lot of people that this was violation of other more broad laws in the First Amendment in general. When San Antonio did this a couple of months ago, they did it twice, actually. They voted twice on this. But the response so far has been that we haven't seen any action. And so we want to make it, we don't want more of this to happen. We've seen other cities doing the same thing now, repeating similar to what happened in San Antonio. And so we got to bring it to a stop now while the legislature is in session. And Senate Bill 1978 does that. And if people want more information, go to SaveChickfilA.com.
SaveChickfilA.com. We're with Jonathan Saenz, Saenz of Texas Values. You can find out more information on Jonathan and Texas Values at txvalues.org. Jonathan, it just seems as though this shouldn't be happening in Texas, right? Are we going to continue to see this type of thing, that the government is going to be discriminating against religious entities and organizations? Do you think that this is a sign of things to come, or do you think this is just a particular instance on the map and we don't really have to worry about it?
No, look, I mean, this unfortunately is a sign of more attacks on people of faith, Christians particularly, because there are close to a dozen incidents like this against Chick-fil-A. We've seen Jack Phillips have to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, the cake baker, because his beliefs on marriage. He didn't want the government to force him to put a message on a custom cake. We've seen the fire chief in Atlanta get fired because somebody found out that he had a conversation and he had beliefs about marriage between a man and a woman. And so, you know, I mean, some of the discussion in San Antonio was because Chick-fil-A has a history of their owner at one point saying that he supported marriage between a man and a woman. And so, you know, the government locally has gone too far in this situation in San Antonio, and they've gone too far in other areas of the state, of the country, Buffalo, San Jose, New Jersey. A lot of other governments have tried to take similar action against Chick-fil-A, and they'll do it against other businesses if they're not stopped now. But Senate Bill 1978 would make it illegal for businesses to do that and leave no doubt where the law is on this issue. And people can find more at SaveChickFilA.com.
SaveChickFilA.com. Yeah, it just seems so interesting as we look to the future. And unfortunately, you're painting kind of a grim picture. But if you look to the past, though, you can see such an encouraging picture of how we've had these businesses and we've had these entities that have existed that kind of operate out of Christian principles that have been such a blessing to their communities. And so it seems so fascinating and so discouraging to hear that more and more we're continuing to see this pressure to be able to squelch religion out of the public square.
Well, and that's why we have to do something swiftly here. And the legislature has a chance here with Senate Bill 1978, the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill. It's not just about Chick-fil-A, but it makes it clear that if you give a donation to a religious organization or you're in a membership in a religious organization, that you cannot be punished by the government because of that. They can't shut you out of a business opportunity. And that impacts us all across the state. And so we don't want to see other entities and local governments trying to do that in different parts of Texas. We got to send a swift message now. And Matt Krause, the state representative from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, is the House sponsor, and Senator Brian Hughes from East Texas have been doing a great job. This bill has bipartisan support. You got Republicans and Democrats that agree on this bill. You got people from a bunch of different kind of political backgrounds and faith backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. And so this is a must-pass issue. Lieutenant Governor has indicated his support. The Speaker of the House has indicated his support. And so really the only thing left is to vote this thing and get it to the governor's desk.
Very good, very good. Is there what are some of the other things that are percolating around down in Austin right now as you're coming up on the very end of session?
Well, look, there's a couple of other issues, too, on the pro-life issue. The Born Alive Infant Protection Act, House Bill 16, has still not made it to the governor's desk. It's passed both chambers, the House and the Senate most recently. And then also Senate Bill 22 is a bill that makes it clear that abortion entities cannot get these sweetheart one-sided deals by the government or rent government space. Planned Parenthood got a deal by the city of Austin that gave them rent in a 3,700 square foot building for $1 a year for 20 years. And so that's out of step with state policy. And Senate Bill 22 should also hopefully be headed to the governor's desk soon, but they're not yet done.
What's keeping them from going there? You there? All righty. Well, we have got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to have more with Jonathan Saenz of Texas Values. If you'd like to find out more information on Jonathan and some of the great work that they're doing, you can go to the Point of View website at pointofview.net, or if you want to just jump straight over there, you can go to txvalues.org. Again, that website is www.txvalues.org. But when we come back from the break, more with Jonathan Saenz, and I'm going to be honest with you all. I'm very interested to hear some of your comments on Game of Thrones. Now, granted, I'm not a big Game of Thrones, but I do know that many of you, specifically 10.3 million Americans, called in sick today. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Should the government break up Facebook? In a previous commentary, I quoted Senator Ted Cruz, who observed that the current big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Nevertheless, he and other senators don't seem ready to act. But joining this discussion is Mark Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook. He concludes in his New York Times op-ed that it is time to break up Facebook. His argument is simple. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have become too powerful and have a virtual monopoly in the area of social media. After all, Facebook has also acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. That means about 70% of American adults use social media, and the vast majority are on Facebook products. He reminds us that Mark Zuckerberg has unilateral control over speech. In fact, he concludes that there is no precedent for his ability to monitor, organize, and even censor the conversations of 2 billion people. While that is true, I also must disagree with the solutions proposed by Mark Hughes. Not only does he want the government to break up Facebook, but he also wants Congress to create a special agency to draft guidelines for acceptable speech on social media. He does acknowledge that the idea of government regulation of speech may sound un-American. Perhaps that is because such an idea is indeed un-American and contrary to the First Amendment. We don't need government deciding what is or is not acceptable speech. I applaud Mark Hughes for speaking up about Facebook. He deserves to be heard because he knows Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook because he was a co-founder. His diagnosis is sound, but his prescription is not. If government does decide to break up Facebook, it shouldn't then decide to also become the arbiter of what can or cannot be said on social media. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and welcome back. I am your host, Nick Pitts. Kirby Anderson is off for the week, and so for our listeners that are usually attuned to hearing the smooth stylings of Kirby Anderson behind the microphone, you've got to put up with me this week, and so grateful that you decided to join us today. We just got off the phone with Jonathan Saenz of Texas Values, kind of helping us better understand what's happening in these last days down in Austin. And so Jonathan ended up having to go, so we'll continue on with the show. And y'all, I'm really excited about this show today. We've got quite a lineup for you all. We'll have some free time here in a little bit. We'll be taking some of your phone calls. I'm going to be making my way through the daily briefing, and there was so much that happened over the weekend. We've got the Game of Thrones had its series finale last night that upwards of 10 million people are calling out sick today because they are mourning, feeling a sense of loss, trying to figure out what's going to fill the void that left. But I want to give particular emphasis to why we might see as though, why we might understand why there's this sense of loss and what makes us so addicted to some of these shows. And so we'll kind of lay out that a little bit. We'll also talk about what happened at Morehouse College yesterday. Yesterday, a commencement speaker went ahead and decided that he was going to give the speech of his life. And this speech was less about the words that he said, but more about the actions that undergirded those words, specifically giving upwards of $40 million to be able to pay off all the student loan debt of the graduating class of Morehouse College 2019. An extraordinary act of generosity and grace that will inevitably lead to immeasurable waves that are being sent and countless directions. And so we'll try to understand the significance of that. But then I'm also interested in what we find is the latest with the Me Too movement. You have individual self-help guru Tony Robbins has, according to some reports out of BuzzFeed, is going down due to some of the allegations that have been leveled against him. And so according to Robbins' theory, that the problem with problems isn't that you don't have any problems, but rather that problems cause you to rise. And we'll try to think through the Tony Robbins saga and then understand the broader impact of what's happening with the Me Too movement. There were a couple of studies that were put out over the weekend relative to what's happening in the workplace and some of the dynamics that are changing because of this Me Too movement. But also, in turn, there was another study that highlighted attorneys in general, and specifically women attorneys, and how they have come out now, and a significant number of them indicated that in the past they have been sexually harassed and or bullied. We'll look through some of those as well. But we also want to let you know that we'll be having open lines for the next 45 minutes. So if you're tired of hearing me talk, please don't turn the channel, but rather just call in and you won't have to listen to me as much. And you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. For those of you who are watching online right now at facebook.com/Point of View Radio. Again, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. You can leave a question or comment underneath the live video feed, and what you share online we'll try to get to over air as well. So let's jump into it, shall we? I am fascinated by Game of Thrones. Now, granted, I have seen parts of a multitude of episodes, but I have friends and I have family members, and I am inundated with the sheer monstrosity that is the wave of Game of Thrones fans. But even in just comparison standpoint, we're getting anywhere from numbers of 14 to 16 to 14 million watched it last week. We don't have the numbers yet for how many people watched it this week, but it just seems as though, I don't know if many of you can relate with this, it seems as though everyone's watching. But then when we put this into historical perspective, it really is like no one is watching. Go back about 30 years and you have the hit show MASH during their series finale. Over 100 million people watched the series finale of MASH. There were only 233 million people in America when MASH was aired during that time. So can you imagine half of America, almost half of America was watching the series finale of MASH when it occurred. But now it's not even a tenth of America that is watching Game of Thrones. Yet it seems as though, I would argue, because of the microphone that is social media, it seems as though everyone is watching Game of Thrones. And so out of my particular silo, I don't know what your thoughts were on the series finale last night. Out of my particular silo, there was great frustration just because there was a quickness and there wasn't necessarily. I had many of my friends that were over at our house last night. They said that there was a lack of resolution that happened with particular characters. No spoiler alerts here. I will not spoil this. Consider me fresh eggs. There will be no rotten, spoiled eggs in this broadcast, and so there won't be any spoilers. But it kind of comes down to a couple of things. I thought there was a really great insight that an individual offered up on social media. He says that there's two types of writing. There are pantsers and there are plotters. Okay, so you've got pantsers that are writing by the seam of their pants, just as they go, allowing the characters to maturate and to develop as they're making their way through. And then there are plotters. Plotters are the individuals that have particular stakes as to where they're going to end. They outline thoroughly and then they start to write. And so there's not that slow maturation process. Well, what you found with Game of Thrones at the very end is you have George R.R. Martin, who wrote the books that inspired the show, still hasn't finished the books right now, and he's much more of a pantser. And this is an individual that writes on the seam of his pants. Hence the reason why he's having such difficulty right now coming up with these last at least two books, from what I understand. He's having extraordinarily, he's struggling, I guess you would say, to try to come up with how do I stay true to the characters that I've developed through this time and move them along in such a way that honors kind of the past as they make their way into the future, in order that the veracity and reliability can be made. And then you've got plotters. Now, for these last 2 seasons, the TV series has deviated from the books just because the books haven't been written yet. And so these are plotters. And so you have George R.R. Martin, who's the author of the books. He's a pantser. And then you've got the plotters, which are the TV series writers. And they knew that they had 2 shorter seasons to be able to make their way to the end. And so they plotted how they were going to try to do the best that they could to stay true to the characters, true to the vision of the show. But then they knew they were going to have to end after 20 episodes, 2 seasons. And so many individuals, I would dare say, if you want to go and entertain and question some of your friends, or maybe you yourself are a watcher of Game of Thrones, or were a watcher, I should say, would say that these past 2 seasons have felt as though the characters have deviated from their heart, have deviated from their true north. It hasn't been nearly as satisfying. Well, that would say, again, I would point to the idea that, again, the writer of the books that inspired the series is a pantser. He's just going by the seam of his pants. Hence the reason why he hasn't been able to come up with the very end. And then you've got the plotters, who are now the TV writers that are had a particular end, and so it seems as though the series felt rushed. But this points to a greater reality, which is why I think that the show is just so popular. Writing in the New York Times, there was an individual that said, quote, "What made Game of Thrones emblematic of its time is how it divided its audience, right down to the matter of what a happy ending would constitute." A number of reasons account for the popularity of the show, but character development was one of them. The complexity of the characters and the sheer number of plot lines offered audience members the opportunities to engage in what's known as parasocial relationships. These connections are strictly one-sided, yet immensely satisfying. Consider your favorite show. So for me, Seinfeld. Easy. See, I am a Kramer guy to the very core of my being. The erratic nature of Kramer and the jokes that he offers up, that's my spirit animal, I guess you could say. But if you're a fanatic of a particular character, you know the history of certain characters, such as when Kramer was frying himself in his apartment due to the Kenny Rogers chicken. So you know the history of characters, but you know trivia about their quirks as well. That he is no anti-dentite. And though they know nothing about you, that doesn't diminish your fandom of them. Well, I would contend that the human spirit is a magnet. It's seeking to draw something or someone close and experience the satisfaction of the intimacy therein. Many lost a satisfying connection last night with Game of Thrones, but awoke this morning to find the same God patiently waiting for them. As Christians, we know we were made in community and made for community. And in this particular community with Christ, you can boldly approach his throne, but you would do well to stay off it. And that's a real Game of Thrones. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Monday, May 20th, 2019 day. Happy Rescue Puppy Day, for those of you that are keeping contact. We have been making our way through the show today. Kirby is out. We talked a little bit with Jonathan Saenz of Texas Values, telling us a little bit about what's happening down in Austin right now. Been making our way through, and then obviously we talked a little bit about Game of Thrones. It's this particular TV show that I guess a couple of people are watching right now that's generating quite a bit of buzz. And we talked a little bit about the idea of parasocial relationships. I'm really honed in on that being one of the primary reasons why I guess you would say Game of Thrones is so popular. That there was just the sheer number of characters, 1, 2, the complexity of those characters, 3, the development that happened within those characters over almost 10 years of watching this show, and then 4, continuing to see that there's just a level of empathy and sympathy that can be generated between individuals as we watch them online. I don't know if you all have a particular favorite show, but oftentimes one of the reasons why we get hooked on shows is what's known as parasocial relationships. These connections are strictly one-sided yet immensely satisfying. So if you're, like I said, if you're a fanatic, you know the history of certain characters and trivia about their quirks. It's almost as if you're in a one-sided relationship that is so enriching, and it just draws you in so closely. I wasn't a Game of Thrones guy. I was a little bit, and again, I think this has been subject to quite a bit of debate within Christian circles, just the kind of the material that was being presented on there. At a point when the show first started, I probably wasn't at a place where I wanted to watch it, but it's been fascinating to be able to see the number of people that have come alongside it. But nevertheless, it was so rich just to see how many individuals, they were more Jon Snow people, or they were more like Dany people. I mean, it even made its way into politics, right? Like for some of us, we remember a couple of weeks ago that Elizabeth Warren, who's the Democratic senator out of Massachusetts, came out and said that she, I guess Dany was like her spirit animal, or she was sympathized and living vicariously through Dany. And then the next week, Dany, this isn't from the last episode, so this is kind of a spoiler. If you haven't watched 2 weeks ago, Dany goes and lights a city aflame and kills a ton of innocent people. Well, I don't know if I was a candidate for president, I would want to sympathize and say that a character pretty much just destroyed an entire city while riding atop her dragon as the character I would want. Honestly, I think I would rather be Jerry Seinfeld or George Costanza. No, I think I'd rather be Newman from Seinfeld. Newman was very calculating. He was very strategic. He didn't always win all the time, but he always left you with a smile. And Newman. But nevertheless, so all that to say, the parasocial relationships, this idea that we can we garner robust, thick relational ties with these characters, even though they're strictly one-sided. And I think that's I think that really is an echo of the divine. We were built in community, and we were made for community. Robert Nesbitt talks about this in his book Quest for Community. There's this inclination within inside of us that really does try to find connections with individuals, even if they are simply one-sided. There's a little anecdote I always like to go back to. Sebastian Junger wrote a book called Tribe, and in the book Tribe, he gives this evidence that was happening during the 18th century, and so really early 18th century, maybe even late 17th century. It is when the settlers are making their way over here to the New World, and specifically when they're here in the yet to be formed United States. They're having a significant amount of interactions. These European settlers are having interactions with some of the Native Americans. And what's fascinating, what Junger points to, is this reality that was happening is that many settlers decided that they were leaving their contingents, their groups of fellow European settlers, and going to live amongst and with the Native Americans. And there were rarely, if ever, any. We don't even have any documented pieces of evidence that point to any Indians that were deciding to go and live with European settlers. And what Sebastian Junger is the point he's making in this book Tribe is that there were such thick relational ties that were so characteristic of these Native Americans that the settlers, though they were quote unquote more advanced they have more technological advances, quote, they have more resources, even though whatever that is, that they were still leaving their fellow settlers behind in order to be able to go and be with the Native Americans in the area. And he points to, and he kind of illuminates this desire for community that's just built into the very sinews of our body. This reality that, again, we were made in community, like Father, Son, Holy Spirit knit us into being. That the psalmist says that we were fearfully and wonderfully made. That it says in Genesis 2 that it's not good for man to be alone. That it says in Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, the reality of as long as encourage one another, spur one another on towards love and good deeds, of what the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 3. As long as today is still called today, let us not forsake, let us encourage one another so that our hearts may not be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. We look throughout the biblical narrative and we see these thick relational ties with people. Obviously, kind of the ultimate one, the prime example is what you see with the Father and the Son, with Jesus. Like the idea that he, probably one of the most piercing cries out from the biblical narrative is when Jesus, when the Father clouds his face from Jesus. The connection that has lasted from eternity has been severed, and Jesus, in response, when that connection has been severed because of sin, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You look at other instances of friendship in the biblical narrative, that you have Jonathan and David just having this rich connection, that are weeping for one another, crying upon each other's neck is one of those pictures that will forever be in my mind. You see this with Joab and Abishai. You see this with Ruth and Naomi. You see there's just a number of instances of these thick relationships that exist all throughout the biblical narrative that point back to the reality that we were made in community and also made for community. And in this 2019 era that we find ourselves in, that desire for community remains the same, but it's being satisfied temporally with the Game of Thrones. But nevertheless, the Game of Thrones is over now. The game is over. And now what we find ourselves with, even though it will no longer temporally bring us satisfaction, it points to the eternal satisfaction that can be found in engaging with and being in communion with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So even though Game of Thrones leaves you, my God will not forsake you. So let's keep on going. There's one more article that I want to direct our attention towards that I thought was such a great news piece that will forever change the bar of what is a good commencement speech. Billionaire Robert F. Smith pledges to pay Morehouse College class of 2019 student debt. The billionaire technology investor Robert Smith pledged Sunday to eliminate the student debt for the entire graduating class at Morehouse College. He says, quote, "On behalf of the 8 generations of my family that have been in this country, we're going to put a little fuel in your bus." He says, "This is my class, 2019, and my family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans." Smith had already given a $1.5 million gift to the school earlier, and the additional pledge to the graduating class of student loan debt is estimated to be at $40 million. What I wrote in the daily briefing this morning, Joe Cocker sang it, and every student thought it yesterday. "You are so beautiful to me." 69% of college students take out loans every year. They graduate with an average of $29,800 of student loan debt. The average monthly student loan payment is $393. But 11.5% of student loans are either delinquent or in default. Smith did something more than just simply paying off student debts yesterday. He infused our world with grace. Similar to throwing a rock in a lake, generosity disturbs the status quo in seen and unseen ways. He launched countless ripples in immeasurable directions that will forever change this world. He freed them in debt, but even more than that, he modeled for them grace, which maybe in this highly partisan era might be the greatest thing he could have done. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, one of the things that we need to spend a little bit of time on is Tony Robbins. He has been accused of sexual misconduct, berating abuse victims. And not only is he the latest victim of the Me Too movement, But also, there's been some illuminating statistics and surveys that have come out too that indicate that things are not going well in the workplace. But we got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more about Tony Robbins and some interesting research.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We have been talking a little bit about Game of Thrones, a little bit about my addiction to Seinfeld, a lot of bit about what's happening down in the Texas House right now, specifically as they're wrapping up the legislative session. And now we're going to transition a little bit and start talking about kind of some of the latest movement that's happening in the Me Too era that we find ourselves living and moving in. Over the weekend, news broke that Tony Robbins was accused of sexual misconduct, berating abuse victims. Self-help guru Tony Robbins has been accused of making inappropriate sexual advances on fans and staff and berating abuse victims in an investigation published by BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed said its report stemmed from an investigation that was based on leaked recordings and internal documents related to Robbins' work and a series of interviews with fans and insiders. The allegations include sexual misconduct and harassment that took place in the 90s and early 2000s before he married his second wife, as well as claims Robbins berated victims of rape or domestic abuse during his self-help sessions. I linked to this article in the Daily Briefing, which you can find more information on, as well as find this morning's edition on the Point of View website at pointofview.net. You can go sign up for the daily briefing at thebriefing.net. But I just want to give you a warning: if you are to watch or to listen to some of the BuzzFeed reports and the recordings that they've released, just know that if you are not attuned to having certain words uttered, there's some pretty harsh language that Tony Robbins levels in these reports. And so Robbins once observed that the only problem we really have is we're not supposed to have problems. Well, now Robbins faces a very public and pervasive problems. Many of you will remember Robbins not only from some of his motivational videos, but also he was invited to the Clinton White House quite a bit, and I believe he was invited to the Bush White House as well. But nevertheless, this is not only a public problem that Robbins now faces, but it's also very pervasive as well. A new survey that was put out over the weekend indicated that 1 in 3 female attorneys has been sexually harassed at work. The report also indicated that 50% of female attorneys said that they have been bullied at work. Not all men mistreat women, but many are changing how they function in the workplace. A new poll found that 60% of male managers are uncomfortable participating in activities like mentoring and socializing with junior-level women. This is a 32% increase from last year. 36% of men say they've intentionally avoided mentoring or socializing with a woman because they were, quote, nervous about how it would look, unquote. Some have hesitations about appearances in this Me Too movement, but we need Mordecai's models of righteousness and not retreat. I was reading an article earlier today sent to me by a dear friend out of the Harvard Business Review, and what the article was illuminating, and I thought was so helpful for me, is that the article really dispelled the myth of the kind of the glass ceiling, and not necessarily to say that there's a myth of the glass ceiling, but the writer was saying how the glass ceiling is just it doesn't do well to describe the situation for women as they find themselves in the workplace. Instead of using the glass ceiling illustration, she said that it would be more appropriate and more instructive to be able to utilize the imagery of a labyrinth. There's a series of twists and turns and difficulties in precarious situations and circumstances that women find themselves in the workplace that hinders them and keeps them from being able to achieve success in the workplace. There was 3 particular parts of that really illuminated for me. It was very helpful. The first being going along with this number. It says, again, to go back to the recent poll that was released earlier this weekend, it said 36% of men say they've intentionally avoided mentoring or socializing with a woman because they were, quote, nervous about how it would look, close quote. One of the things that the article in Harvard Business Review was pointing out with the labyrinth that women find themselves in is the lack of opportunity to access social capital. For generations is probably too generous of a word. For a significant period of time would probably be the better use of the word. For a significant period of time, you've had only opportunities that cater to kind of an all-male atmosphere, whether it's a particular eating establishment, or they were even saying within secular terms like a strip club, or whether it was on the golf course or something. It were very much more men places than were suitable for, or at least open to, women, and it kept them from being able to access the social capital that was instructive as well as beneficial for women to be able to make their way and to form those connections, have some of those conversations that take place after work, for them to be able to advance up the corporate ladder. And so when the news comes out this weekend that 36% of men say they've intentionally avoided mentoring or socializing with a woman because they were, quote, nervous about how it would look, close quote, that creates difficulty for women to be able to climb up the ladder. And so not only some have hesitations about the appearance in this Me Too movement, but we need more Mordecais. So not only just the opportunities, but we need individuals that will come out and to be able to mentor, to offer these instructive, to be able to offer up just those instructive tips that you don't necessarily learn in the workplace or learn rather not in the workplace, but rather learn in books or learn through classrooms as well. There are times when it's going to be necessary to flee like Joseph, but we cannot remain absent. Robbins was right that problems call us to a higher level, but in the scriptures, that higher level is called above reproach. In this world today, we shouldn't have to choose between the idea of staying and fleeing from temptation and staying gone because we're afraid of any type of just even the appearance. That there are opportunities with us, like the biblical narrative even alludes to this idea of entrusting the faithful message that was entrusted to us as well. There's a mentoring discipleship component that can be done safely. Two things can be true at once. That yes, we need to remain free and flee from temptation and remain free from any hints of doing that would be inappropriate or shameful to the gospel of Jesus Christ. But there also must be some type of witness. There must be being a model for good works. It's really hard to be a model for good works, as Titus 1 tells us, when you're not anywhere to be found. And so just increasing importance there as well. But then the last article I want to get to that kind of alludes to this running segment that we've been having on the Millennial Roundtable is with the news you can use mentality. Average wedding guests. You're not going to believe how much it costs to attend a wedding in 2018. But we're going to have to take a break right now. So you'll find out more information on what is the average cost that individuals are investing, I would say, when they go to a wedding in 2018. This was a fascinating study that was put out by Bankrate that I mentioned in the daily briefing. And I think that I want to differentiate that you're not spending the money by going to a wedding, but rather you're investing money. Because I think there's some interesting research from the secular side that will buttress the sacredness of it as well. We'll see the sacredness in the secular. But we're going to have to go to a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Equality Act. We'll have Shapri LoMaglio that's going to be joining us from the CCCU in Washington, D.C. She'll be joining us over the phone. And then we'll also have Wayne Pedersen is going to be joining us over the phone as well later on during the hour as we talk about this Far East broadcasting. And it's going to be way out in the cool sense, what they used to say in the 70s or maybe the 80s. Is that way out, man? No? Too bad. Producers are trying to tell me, get off. This is pathetic, Nick. You're not cool. And we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us today on this Monday, May 20th, 2019 day. For some of you that are listening right now, you've called in sick, specifically because we had this little show called The Game of Thrones that ended last night. And so there has been quite a few of you that specifically the number put is at 10 million Americans have called in sick today because they stayed up perhaps a little bit too late, or maybe they mourned a little too much, trying to figure out how they can fill that void that's now being left in their soul by the Game of Thrones and Bronn. There are no spoilers here. No spoilers that's going to be coming up on this show relative to Game of Thrones. But nevertheless, so grateful that you've decided to join us today. I am the guest host for a lot of this week. You're going to have to put up with me. Kirby is taking a much-deserved little break right now, and so I'm going to be leading the fronts on this effort. You'll have to put up with me tomorrow, because tomorrow is the Millennial Roundtable, when I'll gather my rowdy millennial friends and we'll try to think about the news from a millennial perspective, but also not forsaking the biblical narrative as well. But then you've got to put up with me for the rest of the next 2 hours. And so during this first hour, though, we talked a little bit with Jonathan Saenz down in Austin, telling us the latest of what's happening in Austin, specifically a bill that's being pushed through both the Senate. I believe it's passed the Senate already, and it's making its way through the House right now to try to save Chick-fil-A, to make sure that organizations and entities aren't punished simply because of their charitable donations and their associations with organizations of faith. And so we talked a little bit with him about the importance of making sure that such entities and organizations can still live and move and operate in the public sphere. And then we also shifted gears a little bit to talk about this Game of Thrones thing. I don't know if some of you saw this, but there's apparently a show that came out almost 10 years ago that's been captivating the minds of many Americans. We don't have the numbers and the number relative to the number of people that watched the show last night, but then we talked a little bit about what's the draw of Game of Thrones. Why are so many individuals talking about it, and specifically why are so many individuals attracted to it? I'm shocked at the number that over 10 million Americans have called in sick today, not simply because of the Sunday scaries or the Monday blues, but rather because of the Game of Thrones. They are mourning the loss of Game of Thrones. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then we also transitioned to talk about the latest from the Me Too movement. We have I guess Tony Robbins of Self-Help Guru has accusations have been leveled against him relative to the Me Too movement, some sexual abuse, as well as some inappropriate comments that he offered in the workplace. And we talked about how that also coincided with some news was released relative to the number of female attorneys that say they have been abused. That number is 1 out of every 3 female attorneys say they've been abused. 50% say that they have suffered some type of bullying. And so that's a little bit about what we talked about during the first hour. But I would be really interested. I kind of want to hone in on this Game of Thrones thing. We're starting to see a lot of traction with this, and I really want to talk about this a little bit. Now, granted, there will be no spoilers that are on this show, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on Game of Thrones. Specifically, why do you think we're so captivated by this show? Why do you think there's this magnetic pull that individuals can't help but not only talk about, but post about on social media and kind of think through? You know, I gave my working hypothesis, but I want to hear yours. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Why do you think Game of Thrones is so attractive? Why do you think so many people were watching Game of Thrones? I've got my working theory, but I'd love to hear from you. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can go over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. My working theory was that in psychology, it's known as parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are one-way relationships where individuals know someone and find immense satisfaction despite the fact that that someone doesn't know them. And more often than not, as you would expect, this is characterized by our relationships with particular characters on TV shows. And so, for example, I wasn't necessarily a big Game of Thrones person, but let me tell you, I know my fair share about Seinfeld. I know my fair share about Saved by the Bell as well. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Now, this is the story all about how my life got twisted and turned upside. No, I'm just kidding. But Seinfeld, I could tell you everything there is to know about Kramer. I was a huge Seinfeld fan and still find myself captivated by the erratic nature of Kramer. And for some of you listening, or if you've suffered through watching this on Facebook, you could probably say that, yes, we can tell Kramer's inside of you because you can't keep your hands still. You're all over the place in the cameras. But nevertheless, so talking about these parasocial relationships, there's this sense that we know everything or as much as we can about one particular individual, but though they know nothing about us, we find immense satisfaction in this. And so we see this characterized by knowing certain bits of trivia, knowing the quirks about a particular character, knowing the circumstances that that particular character might have fallen in the past. And all of that just it serves as deposits in the relational bank. And the deposits on your end far exceed the deposits on their end because they simply don't even know you. They don't even know you exist. No, well, I guess they know you exist to the extent that it's a number that's reflected in the Nielsen ratings. But what it points to, what I offer is it points to the reality that we were not only made in community, but we were made for community. In the biblical narrative, we know it to be true that it's not good for man to be alone. We also know it to be true that we were a joyful creation of Father, Son, and Spirit, as C.S. Lewis talks about there being the tango of the divine. Out of that loving dance arises individuals that were fearfully and wonderfully made. And one of the fascinating things is what we see is that not only we were born, yes, in isolation, but we quickly were born into a family, and that family was born into a particular community as well. That throughout the biblical narrative, you have individuals that Paul had Timothy, Jonathan had David, Jesus had his beloved disciple, and then the three close disciples, the sons of Zebedee, that Ruth had Naomi, that Deborah had Barak. All of these friendships populate the biblical narrative because it points to the reality of what the writer of Ecclesiastes, the teacher, the preacher, depending upon your translation, would say, that a cord of three strands is not easily broken. Two is better than one. This reality that we were made to be together. We were not made, no man is an island. We're not meant to be alone, that we're far better together than we are isolated. And I think the Game of Thrones, what it has done so well is it's developed characters that have come alive before us and developed before us to such an extent that it's magnetically pulled us in through the sheer complexity of the characters and the number of plot lines to an extent that many individuals, what the numbers indicate, 10 million, are feeling a sense of void this morning because now Game of Thrones lives on in syndication. Though Game of Thrones won't be with you, our God will. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more from Point of View right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Should the government break up Facebook? In a previous commentary, I quoted Senator Ted Cruz, who observed that the current big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Nevertheless, he and other senators don't seem ready to act. But joining this discussion is Mark Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook. He concludes in his New York Times op-ed that it is time to break up Facebook. His argument is simple. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have become too powerful and have a virtual monopoly in the area of social media. After all, Facebook has also acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. That means about 70% of American adults use social media, and the vast majority are on Facebook products. He reminds us that Mark Zuckerberg has unilateral control over speech. In fact, he concludes that there is no precedent for his ability to monitor, organize, and even censor the conversations of 2 billion people. While that is true, I also must disagree with the solutions proposed by Mark Hughes. Not only does he want the government to break up Facebook, but he also wants Congress to create a special agency to draft guidelines for acceptable speech on social media. He does acknowledge that the idea of government regulation of speech may sound un-American. Perhaps that is because such an idea is indeed un-American and contrary to the First Amendment. We don't need government deciding what is or is not acceptable speech. I applaud Mark Hughes for speaking up about Facebook. He deserves to be heard because he knows Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook because he was a co-founder. His diagnosis is sound, but his prescription is not. If government does decide to break up Facebook, it shouldn't then decide to also become the arbiter of what can or cannot be said on social media. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about Game of Thrones, how the series finale happened last night. Many individuals have called in sick this morning, upwards of 10 million people have called in sick because their hearts are devastated that the Game of Thrones has ended. I was trying to come up with a play on the Thrones games have ended, but nevertheless, I got defeated by the throne, I guess you could say. But nevertheless, we've been talking a little bit about the Game of Thrones. We're going to pivot a little bit to a topic that I think is generating a little bit of controversy, one might be able to say. It's the latest victim of the Me Too movement, I guess you would say. You've got Tony Robbins, who has been accused of sexual misconduct and berating abuse victims. Self-help guru Tony Robbins has been accused of making inappropriate sexual advances on fans and staff and berating abuse victims in an investigation published by BuzzFeed News. BuzzFeed said its report stemmed from an investigation that was based on leaked recordings, internal documents related to Robbins' work, and a series of interviews with fans and insiders. The allegations include sexual misconduct or harassment that took place in the 90s and early 2000s before he was married to his second wife. Robbins once observed that the only problem we really have is where we think we're not supposed to have problems. Now, Robbins faces a very public and pervasive problem. A recent survey found that 1 in 3 female attorneys has been sexually harassed at work. The report also indicated that 50% have been bullied. And one of the things that a question that we opened up in the last hour is, do you find these numbers to be true or not? Do you think these are overinflated numbers, or do you find that though as though these numbers accurately depict the description of the workplace relative to women. Some people agreed, and also some people disagreed as well. Donna on Facebook writes, I'm not ready to accept this. In 40 plus years of professional work, I've never experienced bullying from my male colleagues. In addition, females can be unrelenting bullies. I do believe that bullying occurs in the workplace, but it is seldom gender related. This is just a personal viewpoint of what I've experienced. Well, thank you so much, Donna. We'd really appreciate and really be interested to hear what you have to say as well. You can go on facebook.com/pointofviewradio and share your comments. Do those numbers sound kind of high? The new survey that indicated that 1 in 3 female attorneys has been sexually harassed at work, that 50% have been bullied. Does that number seem high or does it seem right? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Do those numbers seem about right relative to 1 in 3 female attorneys being sexually harassed at work? The report also indicated that 50% of female attorneys say they have been bullied in the workplace. Again, you can call in 800-351-1212 or www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. I think it's really interesting. Again, I'm not quite, I don't know what to think of this, just because this is really one of those areas that I just lean on the statistics, because I really can't, contrary to what our culture said, I can't be a woman. Like I don't know how to slip into and understand the female perspective. And so it's been very helpful for me to hear from others as well. I was recently giving a talk on feminism, the historical trends of feminism, as well as trying to chart and forecast where feminism might make its way into the future. And one of the helpful questions that arose during the Q&A is just this idea that all this woman has known, she is in an industry in which it was a very male-dominated, male-heavy industry. And what she found is that there was just these subtle, silent pressures that fell on women in those type of places. And in response, one of the things I was thinking as she was saying those things, I was trying to think about some of the places and areas in which I have been the only gender, the singular gender in a place, that I've been overwhelmingly the only male. And I couldn't think of a time in which I was quite literally the only male in a particular setting. And then, wouldn't you know it, 2 days later after I gave this talk, I was making my way to the local gym, and I like to wake up early and write the daily briefing, but then make my way towards the boxing gym. And so I was going to go to a boxing class. And on this morning, at this particular morning, I go into the class, and there's probably around 20 people that are situated behind these big, heavy bags. And so just imagine 20 to 30 heavy bags that are just falling, that are being held up by the ceiling, and they're spaced out pretty evenly. And as I'm making my way to the heavy bag, I'm kind of, it's groggy because it's really early in the morning. I'm putting my wraps on, and then the instructor comes in, and usually it's a male instructor. This was a female instructor that was there this morning. She said she was a substitute for the male. And then lo and behold, as we're making our way through the class, about 3 minutes into it, I take another look around, and I realized something very quickly. I was the only male in this class of all female boxers, and even the what's it called? The instructor was female. And it was in that moment that I thought back to our conversation that I had just 2 days prior about the reality of being the only representation of my gender in a situation. But in that moment, in that 60-minute boxing class at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was keenly aware of my masculinity and my lack of aggression on that 65-pound punching bag. But it did change my perspective relative to the reality of women. For some women that are in male heavy dominated workplaces and industries, that they are keenly aware of their femininity when they go into the workplace. One of the reasons, primarily, being that they just largely they're the only female there. I was drawn to an article recently in the Harvard Business Review that talked about how women kind of lack social capital opportunities in the workplace as well, because there are many times that business is done outside the normal hours that are more typically lean towards male situations and scenarios. May they be bars, or may they be other places that we don't endorse on Point of View, obviously, but are just places in which it's just much more, again, male heavy and male dominated as well. Not having those accesses to social capital, and what we know from the research, and it's very clear that having that type of social capital, being able to do business outside of the business hours, may they be at restaurants, may they be at watering holes, may they be on the golf course, may they be in the basketball gyms. It's those type of avenues that really engender strong relational bonds that allow individuals, that give them a particular leg up when it comes to climbing up that social ladder. That was one particular aspect out of this Harvard Business Review study that I read, article that I read, that indicated that, again, there's just another metric by which it's not necessarily that there's a glass ceiling, because when there's the glass ceiling, it assumes there's only one level that women haven't been able to break through, that it's pretty much easy until you get to the almost top. When in reality, what this woman was arguing for, and I thought persuasively in this Harvard Business Review article, was it's less a glass ceiling and more a labyrinth. They're having to make their way through various circumstances and situations and difficulties along the way. And it's not simply just that when they get to the top, almost to the top, that they're experiencing the difficulty. So I'd be really interested to know, what do you think on this? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on over on Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Do you think that accurately describes the women's experience in the workplace? Is it less a glass ceiling and more a labyrinth? Is it less just one difficulty that someone experiences once they get to this, almost to the top, or more various difficulties and trying circumstances that they have to navigate through as they make their way up the social ladder, corporate ladder, rather, I should say? Again, we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or log on Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. When we get back, though, we're going to have to take a commercial break, but we'll be back, though. And when we get back, I'm really excited for this conversation that we're going to be having. There is a bill that's currently making its way through Congress right now, known as the Equality Act, and it specifically targets Christian higher education institutions. And so we'll be learning more about this Equality Act, because we'll be joined over the phone by Shapri LoMaglio. Shapri is out of the CCCU in D.C. and is going to be joining us over the phone to help us better understand what is the Equality Act and what are some of the detriments and pitfalls that are implicit within the Equality Act as well. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more with Shapri LoMaglio, as well as talking about the Equality Act. And we'll be back, though, right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this May 20th, 2019 day. So grateful that you have decided to join us. And we're being joined over the phone right now. We've got Shapri LoMaglio of the CCCU. She leads the CCU's response to legislative, legal, and regulatory matters on behalf of more than 180 institutions of Christ-centered higher education. She advocates on their behalf in Washington, D.C. on a wide range of policy issues rooted in their shared faith. Shapri, how are you today?
Hey, Nick. Good to talk to you. I'm doing great. Thank you.
So great to have you on. So help us to understand. We've been hearing more and more about this Equality Act. We've known it's been coming down the barrel here for a little bit, and now it seems to be poking its head right now. So help us understand what is, I guess the first question that begs to be asked for our listeners is, what is this Equality Act we've been hearing so much about?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's an important thing for people to know about. It's a bill that actually just passed the House of Representatives on Friday last week with 236 votes, so strong vote. And it is a bill that puts sexual orientation and gender identity into law, but it does it in a way that has almost no religious exemptions, and so it actually would create significant conflicts in real time for religious organizations and K-12 Christian colleges, churches, and just pretty much from soup to nuts, organizations and persons who have historic Christian views about marriage, gender, or human sexuality would run into a lot of conflict were this law to pass the Senate and be signed by the president.
So help us understand, though, because if you're thinking about it, there's almost like two camps, right? So one, especially our audience is keenly aware of just some of the overtures that are being leveled about Christians being able to work out their faith. But to a certain degree, we understand that we don't want to discriminate against anybody. And so help us to understand how this isn't necessarily a discriminatory bill. We're not trying to be protective in our efforts to be able to discriminate. What's the hazard of this bill, especially for Christians?
That's right, Nick. That's a great way to frame it. I think the problem is really that all rights have to be balanced against other rights, right? That makes sense to us in kind of some really common sense ways. Like, we know that you can't go into a movie theater and shout fire. Mm-hmm. We know that you can't have a parade down the middle of your residential street at midnight, right? There's time, place, and manner restrictions for free speech, even though we strongly support and protect free speech in the United States. And so same with this law, it's putting rights into law, which in themselves are not bad, but it's doing it in a very unbalanced way, in a way that actually tramples First Amendment rights of free exercise. It tramples First Amendment rights of free speech in some instances. It tramples First Amendment rights of freedom of association and assembly. People who, you mentioned are Christians, right? Well, a Christian college is a group of people who have gathered together around a shared set of values and beliefs, which is what the freedom of assembly or association in the First Amendment protects. Mm-hmm. And this would interfere with that. And so, and including, and then finally, like by dismantling the kinds of institutions that teach religion, that interferes with the Establishment Clause. And so it's really about the fact that this bill puts rights into law in a way that's desperately unbalanced with other important foundational, fundamental rights, and we're talking about primarily First Amendment rights here.
Wow. So Shapri, again, we're being joined by Shapri LoMaglio of the CCCU, and she's helping us understand what was just passed in the House of Representatives, the Equality Act, which is really, to a certain degree, a significant threat against our First Amendment rights, the freedom of exercise of the religion in the public square. But Shapri, help us to understand. So my papa used to have a phrase that you've got the 30,000-foot view, but let's bring it down to the kitchen table a little bit. Let's think through some examples right now, especially for our audience, to help them understand the significance of this bill taking effect. If this bill were to be passed in the Senate and passed by the president, which I don't think you're based on your forecasting, it won't happen. But help us to understand what are some examples, especially in the higher education space, that the implications of this bill, if it were to go into effect, would render. in the higher education space.
Yeah, that's great. So the most obvious and devastating one is a student right now in the United States can get their federal student aid, right? A student loan, a Pell Grant. And our tradition in the United States is that they can take that to whatever college or university they want to. They pick the school that's the best fit for them to succeed at. And this would actually prevent students from taking their federal student loans, federal grant money to a college with a traditional view of marriage, gender, or human sexuality. So that is a game changer, right? That's devastating, and that uniquely discriminates really against religious students who might want to do that. Not to say all students that go to religious colleges are religious, but certainly the vast majority are, and that would have a disproportionate effect. And then there's also schools that give federal grants, right? Research grants to develop new scientific and medical technologies and other sorts of ways in which they would be prohibited from that simply because they have these religious beliefs. And then Mission Central is hiring, right? Every religious organization right now has protected the right to hire based on religion, and because the government, the Constitution recognizes that the ability to hire according to your mission, according to and consistent with your religious convictions, is essential for an institution to be able to faithfully perform its mission. So this would say, actually, this would put that into jeopardy and say, you know, if you have as part of your hiring policies and your employment policies, again, traditional or historic Christian views around marriage, gender, human sexuality, that you would not be able to enforce those in your hiring. It would put that into jeopardy. So there's a lot more details, but just to really, as you said, the kitchen table, brass tacks, how does this affect my life, my student, my grandchild, my institution? That's how.
That just is shocking to me. So in an effort to keep individuals from discriminating against LGBTQI individuals, they're going to discriminate Christians in turn for just being able to try to practice out and to work out their faith with fear and trembling in the workplace. This just seems wrong to a large degree. Where is this coming from, Shapri?
Well, Nick, I think what you're highlighting in the question you just so artfully asked is the fact that in our society right now, we really are at loggerheads on this particular question, but in general as well. Absolutism is really the theme of how people too often view many issues. I want all my rights, I want everything, and somebody else gets nothing. And in the case of rights, that's, as I mentioned earlier, not how rights have or do or will work in the future. And so when either side actually has an absolutist view, I think what happens is it actually drives people further apart, makes policies more extreme, makes the consequences more devastating for one side or the other, right? And so it puts people in existential threat, and then everybody is in a place of negotiating for their lives, for the mission, for the most central core things that they hold to and believe in, and then it's very difficult to find a way forward. And so I think rights are not absolute, and we have to find a way forward in this country to figure out how to balance rights against one another. And that's what's lacking in this conversation in a way that could have really devastating effects.
Well, we are being joined right now by Shapri LoMaglio of the CCCU, talking a little bit about the Equality Act that just recently was passed on Friday of last week, passed the House, and will make its way, I would assume, to the Senate. But we're going to have to take a break right now. When we come back from the break, more with Shapri as well. I'll be really interested to be able to talk more about some future implications of what this Equality Act, if it doesn't pass, then what's the next iteration of this? Where does she anticipate it going off into the future? And so we'll be talking a little bit with her about that as well. Because, you know, as you look back into the past and you have this understanding of, we hear about this separation of church and state. This was originally coined by Roger Williams all the way in the 17th century. But when Roger Williams was describing the separation of church and state, he used the illustration of a beautiful garden, which is the church, and this kind of wilderness was the state. And it was never intended to, in order to be able to keep the religious individuals and the religious institutions out of the wilderness, but rather it was to try to keep the state out of that beautiful garden. William's original intention was to be able to allow the church to be able to go out and to be able to do good works in order that they might be able to glorify their Father in heaven, to seek the welfare of the city. But now it seems as though we've twisted it. And so as we make our way into the future, we'll have to take a break. But when we come back from the break, I'm going to be really interested to hear Shapri's analysis as we continue to move forward. What is that going to look like for those of us that are enjoying the garden and seeking to spread the garden and make his kingdom come? We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone by Shapri LoMaglio, sorry about that, Shapri, of the CCCU. We have been talking about the Quality Act, just recently was passed in the House of Representatives by an overwhelming margin. And what was so interesting is that typically you have certain Republicans that are willing to, that would be against a certain measure, but I'm numbering, it looks as though there's around 8 Republicans that voted with the Democrats on this particular measure. But what was so interesting is what I thought is coming out of the public square as well. I'm reading an article by The Hill, said that more than 200 businesses, including Facebook, Google, Hilton, J.P. Morgan Chase have backed this measure as well. And so, Shapri, is this type of mentality, this zero-sum game when it comes to discrimination bills, this LGBTQI, is this a thing that's going to continue to be with us as we make our way into the future?
Well, I think the prevailing wisdom is certainly that protecting LGBT people in the law in the areas the Equality Act covers, housing and employment and public accommodations, is indeed a good thing to do. That is absolutely the prevailing wisdom of the Congress, as you said, of the businesses. And I think as Christians, we really have to think deeply if that's something that we're opposed to, right? Do we want our LGBT neighbors to risk being put discrimination in those ways? But I think we also, and I think the prevailing wisdom is also that religious liberty equals discrimination. Mm-hmm. And so I think we actually have those of us who believe in the principles of religious liberty as foundational to this country, I think we actually have a steep climb uphill to reclaim the story of what religious liberty is actually about, that you were talking about before the break, about the garden and and what it's about. And I think that we have to navigate that carefully and winsomely, and not and too often we're against other things instead of being for something. So I think we have to figure out how to be for religious liberty in a way that isn't against somebody else and their rights, right? And it's about, and I don't mean to keep repeating this, but I think this is just how civil rights work, and many people don't understand that. But as a lawyer, you're trained all through school to see, well, this right intersects with this right in this way. And so I think on this question, we have to find a way to say religious liberty and LGBT rights can coexist, but we have the uphill narrative climb, and so we have to figure out a way to talk about religious freedom, as I said, about being what we're for and not what we're against. And we can be for the protection of LGBT people and for religious convictions and liberties and communities and codes of conduct and all of the ways in which religious organizations have currently organized themselves. But we have the heavier lift right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's just so interesting. And again, I mean, I could just rant on this, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, because like you said, there just has to be a nuanced understanding, because especially as Christians, if we just look at the biblical narrative, it's so clear that, I mean, you think about Jeremiah 29:7, to seek the welfare of our city. James 2, of not showing favoritism towards anyone, of extending love towards everyone, being lavish in our love. To be patient with individuals, to extend kindness towards individuals, because it's kindness that leads to repentance. But it's also this understanding of, well, I don't want the government to be able to, one, force me to be able to employ, or force me to be able to discriminate against me for trying to live out the convictions that I believe to be true, and that not only have I believed to be true, but also countless individuals from thousands of years beforehand believed to be true. So I guess as we're trying to figure out how to coexist in this pluralistic society, what are some of the necessary steps that Christians are going to have to take moving forward? Because you talk about to a certain degree, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seemed as though you were saying right now that the onus is on Christians in particular at this point in the timeline right now, that we're going to have to go above and beyond. Is that a right characterization of what you were saying?
I think that's right.
Okay.
I think we have the ground to make up.
Yeah.
The narrative about religious liberty has been distorted, and too often we've let it become that by overreaching, by supporting policies that actually have nothing to do with religious liberty, but in the name of religious liberty, as opposed to just saying, this is my political preference or belief. This actually doesn't have anything to do with religious liberty, right? And there's a difference there. Mm-hmm. And so I say that to say that I think we have to do that well. And you were talking about what are the ways we can do that well. I think one way is, and this is something that we have been doing here in Washington, and it's been an incredible story. It's been an incredible experience. The CCC, we've actually been sitting down with LGBT advocates for the last number of years saying, is there a way forward here? Mm-hmm. Is there possible common ground? And what we've been finding out is there actually is. there's quite a lot of common ground. And so I think on this topic, on a lot of topics, right, we need to sit down with the people that we think that there's just no way forward, right? We're too often we're more comfortable because it's easier being with our tribe, being with the people who agree with us about everything. It's harder and more uncomfortable to step out and cross over and try to find that common ground, and not just identify the common ground you already have, but actually try to make new common ground.
Yeah, to be peacemakers, right?
And be peacemakers. That's right, Nick, because peace, I heard someone say it this way, and it made such an impression on me. So I'm going to repeat it, but I don't want to take the credit for it. But they said peacemaking is different than peacekeeping. Because peacekeeping, right, is just simply preserving the status quo. But peacemaking is entering into the conflict with the goal of making peace. And I think that's so powerful. It's what Christ calls us to in Matthew 5. And I think we, on this issue in particular, right now, are being called as Christians to say, how do we make peace? How do we lead?
Exactly. And again, it allows us to be able to utilize, to a certain degree, to utilize our ability to be able to exercise our convictions in the public sphere. How do I not only hold these truths to be true, how do I not hold these convictions to be true, but how do I live out those convictions in such a way that not only would I win the point, but win the person as well, to be winsome in our manner, to be loving. Loving is all. It's not trying to demonize the worst. It's trying to look for the best and redeem the worst in such a way that we might be able to move forward for the benefit of our cities. Because I sure hope that this doesn't have to continue the way that it's going right now, because it seems as though it's so fractious, it's so divisive right now. And as you look to Jesus, you can't help but see that, yes, he did bring separation to certain individuals, but he was always seeking towards making that peace as well, to restore that shalom. And I think that's what we've been called to as well. So, Shapri, thank you so much for joining us. Tell our listeners one more time where they can find out more information on the CCCU, as well as latest updates with the Equality Act.
Yeah, well, it was great to be with you. Thank you so much. And for listeners, our website is www.cccu.org.
Very neat. Well, thank you so much, Shapri. Have a great day.
Yeah, great to talk to you.
And so we are going to have to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we've got Wayne Pedersen is going to be joining us. Wayne is, we're going to be talking about the Far East broadcasting. I'm kind of excited about this. Wayne began his radio career in 1967 as an announcer on KTIS in Minneapolis. He's a longtime afternoon drive host, but now is making his way into some interesting places. We'll leave it with that ambiguity of going to some interesting places. And so you're going to be really excited. You're going to want to stick around and listen to some of the work that Wayne is doing here in this next little stretch. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to welcome Wayne, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit. And then we'll also have some open lines as well. But find out more information on Shapri and the efforts at CCCU relative to the Equality Act. You can go to our website at pointofview.net, or you can make your way over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We've got to go to a break, but we'll be back right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Monday, May 20th, 2019 day. So grateful that you have decided to join us. For those of you that have been hanging around for the past 2 hours, God bless your soul. I'm only assuming that you're one of the 10 million people that stayed up too late last night watching Game of Thrones and now find yourselves taking the day off work because you're sick. Your heart's sick because Game of Thrones is no longer on TV. But nevertheless, we're grateful that you are here with us. For the past 2 hours, we've been talking about a little of everything. Talked with Jonathan Saenz of Texas Values about the latest of the Chick-fil-A, saving Chick-fil-A in the Texas State House. Talked to Jonathan for a little bit, then made our way over and just got off the phone with Shapri LoMaglio of the CCCU, telling us about the latest of the Equality Act and the detriment and the potential pitfalls that could have for Christians as they're seeking to work their faith out with fear and trembling in the public square. But also, what does it look like moving forward as well? Are we going to continue to be at loggerheads? What are some of those efforts that can be done to be able to hopefully to make the peace as we make our way into the future? And so we had a conversation with Shapri, and it was a very beneficial conversation. And now we make our way into hour 3. And I mean, I'm not going to be biased right now, but I just need you to know we've saved the best for last. So we've got Wayne Pedersen on the phone to talk to us a little bit about the Far East Broadcasting Network. Wayne, you there?
Nick, you are so kind. I appreciate that very much. And, you know, all the bad stuff that's happening in the country, as I've heard you recite this, and there's plenty to be despairing about, but there are places in the world that are much worse, like North Korea, for example. Can you imagine being a Christian and living under Kim Jong-un? I can't imagine.
I cannot imagine, especially relative to some of the work that's been kind of publicized of what he's been doing relative to labor camps. And so help us to understand, you in the Far East Broadcasting are starting to make your way into that area, correct?
Well, for years we've had an FM station in South Korea that does leak over into North Korea a little bit past the demilitarized zone. And we know that there are very, very few Christians in North Korea. There are millions of Christians in South Korea. There's been a real revival. In fact, they're a mission-sending country. But Kim Jong-un has repeatedly threatened America, as you know, as a rocket man and all the rhetoric. But internally, he seeks to wipe out any trace of Christianity. He's calling himself God, and he's anybody that identifies with Christ, he either arrests them or they mysteriously disappear or they're put in prison or even killed just for being a follower of Jesus. And if you're a pastor or a teacher, it's even worse for you. So, Open Doors for the last 18 years has listed North Korea as the most strongly persecuted country in the whole world.
Wow. That is.
That's why we're putting a superstation out of South Korea that's going to blanket all of North Korea. And get this, Nick, 250,000 watts of power. Now, the most you can license in the United States for an AM radio station is 50,000 watts. Here we have 250,000 watts of power, virtually a signal that cannot be blocked anywhere, that will cover all of North Korea. The programming is prepared, produced, and presented by Koreans, many of them North Koreans that have fled the country. They know the language. They know the culture. They know the issues their colleagues in North Korea are facing. They're going to be on the air with encouragement, helping them with families and marriages and finances, what little they have, but more importantly, every day to share the good news of Jesus Christ, that their sins can be forgiven. They can know Jesus as Savior. They can know that they're going to live with God in heaven forever. Regardless of how miserable this life has been, they have a glorious future in Jesus Christ.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So help us to understand, with this 250,000 watts, that just seems so significant right now. And so help us to understand the implications of that. Does that mean it's going, because correct me if I'm wrong, there's around 25 million North Koreans currently living within the borders right now. Is that going to be able to reach to all 25 million?
It's going to cover the whole country, actually, all the way up from the radio station is on the west coast, northwest coast of South Korea, that trips across the ocean for a bit and then covers the whole country all the way up north. And so you're right, 25.5 million people, 99.3% are unreached with the gospel.
Wow.
So we have a big job to do, and this is going to be a bold witness to Jesus Christ. And can you imagine people, it's called the hermit kingdom because they've been so excluded and protected from the outside world. They have no idea. Besides that, there's extreme poverty. What money there is in the country goes to the corrupt government and to the wealthy leaders and to the military, and the people are suffering with inadequate food, no medical help, little education, and just kind of the clothes on their backs. It's a very impoverished country physically, but also spiritually, because they've been excluded from the opportunity to hear the gospel.
It's always so staggering. Fox News has done quite a bit of reporting on this, as well as Open Doors, talking about just some of the tragedy that is just an everyday part of the life for Christians in North Korea. I remember reading one article that indicated that you just have Christians that are meeting and they're trying to meet, and they're whispering certain hymns to one another.
Yeah.
That they're being gathered together in almost these concentration style camps, to where they're just being one report. I know this sounds so gruesome right now, but I think it's important for us to understand the significance. One report even indicated that they're being bulldozed over to a certain degree, that guards are given rewards when they can have Christians to be able to recant from the faith. So I'm not just thinking that this broadcast is important to not only try to win people to Christ, but also I would imagine this type of broadcast is going to be essential to help encourage people that are just trying to live out their faith in this very difficult situation.
The horror stories that come in is not just about arrests and beating and sometimes killing, but horrific torture that comes along. There's so much hatred. This is such an evil empire, I believe, inspired by Satan himself as opposition to Christ and the gospel. It's just horrific. But the thing that is humbling to me, Nick, I mean, if I lived there, I'd be praying for protection every day, many times a day. Lord, keep me safe, keep me safe, keep me safe. The Christians in North Korea, how few there are, pray for courage. They pray for perseverance, because Christians there are trying to gather together in the name of Christ to pray together, but now they'll be able to listen to the radio together. And they're willing to endure the threat of severe persecution. And the neat thing about radio, I mean, AM radio is the cheapest form of radio. FM radios are expensive. They don't have computers or cell phones or TVs or anything like that because the people are so poor. But as you know, AM radio has been around forever. Most people from way back have AM radios. They can plug in their little earbuds and listen in secrecy while they're working in their shops or working in their fields or on the streets. So they'll have those radios with them and be listening. And there'll be times when they gather together, they can listen as a group.
That's phenomenal. We've got to take a commercial break, but we'll be back with Wayne right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Should the government break up Facebook? In a previous commentary, I quoted Senator Ted Cruz, who observed that the current big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Nevertheless, he and other senators don't seem ready to act. But joining this discussion is Mark Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook. He concludes in his New York Times op-ed that it is time to break up Facebook. His argument is simple. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have become too powerful and have a virtual monopoly in the area of social media. After all, Facebook has also acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. That means about 70% of American adults use social media, and the vast majority are on Facebook products. He reminds us that Mark Zuckerberg has unilateral control over speech. In fact, he concludes that there is no precedent for his ability to monitor, organize, and even censor the conversations of 2 billion people. While that is true, I also must disagree with the solutions proposed by Mark Hughes. Not only does he want the government to break up Facebook, but he also wants Congress to create a special agency to draft guidelines for acceptable speech on social media. He does acknowledge that the idea of government regulation of speech may sound un-American. Perhaps that is because such an idea is indeed un-American and contrary to the First Amendment. We don't need government deciding what is or is not acceptable speech. I applaud Mark Hughes for speaking up about Facebook. He deserves to be heard because he knows Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook because he was a co-founder. His diagnosis is sound, but his prescription is not. If government does decide to break up Facebook, it shouldn't then decide to also become the arbiter of what can or cannot be said on social media. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I've been joined over the phone by Wayne Pedersen right now of Far East Broadcasting, doing some great work right now, telling us about some of the new work that's happening with their efforts in North Korea right now. Going to be sending 250,000 watts signal, a radio signal, into North Korea in order, one, to be able to encourage the people, the Christians in North Korea too, but also to share about the good news of Jesus Christ to the people of North Korea right now in this hermit kingdom, as Wayne was describing, of 25 million people. A great effort that's being done. But Wayne, that's not the only efforts of what you're doing right now. You all have been working in this area for quite a while, right?
Well, thank you. FEBC, Far East Broadcasting, is part of a coalition of ministries that are focused on the least reached places of the world, places that have less than 2% Christian, no Bible, no missionary, no church. And this is some of the high-hanging fruit. A lot of the low-hanging fruit in missions has been picked, and we're seeking to draw attention to the parts of the world where there's no gospel at all. Far East Broadcasting has a huge ministry in China through shortwave and internet, and the Chinese government has allowed those shortwave signals to continue to come into the country because the country is so vast, it's almost impossible to block the shortwave. But meanwhile, many Christians, many people in China have mobile technology, mobile phones. They're able to download our content. We had 2 radio stations in Russia, one in St. Petersburg and one in Moscow. The government shut down those stations a couple of years ago, but we still have about 10 million Russians across the country that are downloading content from the cloud into their mobile phones. We have 7 stations in Ukraine, We're reaching in Mongolia. 20 years ago, Mongolia was a closed country with very few believers. Today, there are about 50,000 believers there, and we have a half a dozen stations there. So the focus of Far East Broadcasting Company is definitely to reach those that have never heard, like the Apostle Paul said in Romans 15:20. It's my ambition to preach the gospel where the name of Christ is not known unless we build on somebody else's foundation.
Unreal. Some of the efforts that are being done. So let's concentrate a little bit in China, because I mean, Wayne, as we read some of the headlines right now, it seems as though not only one, are we in a trade war with China, but two, it seems as though the Chinese are going great efforts right now, especially among the Uyghur Muslims right now, in their efforts to be able to monitor this group of people. But also, it seems as though they're going above and beyond right now. Is this a cause for concern?
Well, very, very much. For many years, we've been able to do ministry in China with the knowledge of the Chinese government without hindrance, but it is changing. As we do apps and websites and streaming on social media, the government just as quickly shuts those down until we can move to another app or another frequency or whatever. So we have to be adroit about that. But more particularly, the Chinese government has come out, no one under the age of 18 is allowed to attend church. If they do, their family will be arrested. And that's an effort to halt the spread of Christianity among the young people, the next generation. When you go into a church in North Korea, there are surveillance cameras. So when you go in there, you know face recognition is going on. They're keeping track of who's going in, who's going out. It's very intimidating. And often there are policemen standing in the back of the church during the service, taking note of who's there, who's coming and going. So you can imagine as a Christian, as a parents that have family, you would think twice about whether you would go to a public gathering knowing that you are going to be watched, you're being intimidated, and you could be arrested or questioned or intimidated by the authorities. So it's a very, very serious time in China. Besides that, pastors are being arrested and put in prison. One pastor in China told us that it's not a matter of if I go to jail, it's a matter of when, because it's inevitable. Wow. If you're a Christian pastor in China, you will be arrested sometime and you will spend some jail time, sometimes months, sometimes years. You'll be separated from your family. You may not see your family again. So what you're saying is true. There's been a real turn. India is the same thing. The authorities have clamped down on Christianity and ministries, kicked some ministries out. China, here are the two most populous countries in the world that have marked opposition to the gospel. But we are so grateful that we have the tools of media, and you know this well. You know the power of radio and internet and satellite. We have these tools that God has given us to go past the obstacles put up by the authorities so we can get to the gospel direct to the hearts of the people.
That's phenomenal. What do you think is the reason why we're seeing this uptick in persecution and difficulty that Christians are facing right now in China? And then, and perhaps even the better question is, not only why are we experiencing this, but we also know that there's some great work that's being done, largely because of the efforts that you all are doing at the Far Eastern Broadcasting Company. Some great things are happening right now across the world that are a great cause for celebration.
There's those that know and have researched this say there's been more persecution of Christians in the last 100 years than in the previous 1900 years together.
Wow.
Why is that? I do believe it's because of the rapid spread of the gospel. We're in the last days. In the last days, the gospel is spreading. We don't see so much of it in North America and Europe. In fact, it seems to be going the opposite way. But in Eastern Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, the gospel is spreading. And one of the fastest growing churches in the world, Iran. A second fastest growing church in the world, Afghanistan. It seems where the persecution is the heaviest, the gospel is growing faster. And so when the authorities see the rapid spread of the gospel, they panic and they get concerned and they tighten down the persecution. And as they tighten down, it seems like Christianity spreads even more. And I do believe it's the unsuccessful attempts of the evil one, the enemy of the gospel, the enemy of Christ, to stop the spread of the gospel. But his efforts are being foiled because, as Jesus said, greater is he that is in you, in the church, than he that is in the world. So it's an ironic thing that we see happening, but you've got to surmise that it's the power of the Holy Spirit that's doing this. I don't know how you account for it otherwise.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Okay, so Wayne, help us understand where can we find out more information on the Far East Broadcasting Company? Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, we have a great website. It's FEBC. That stands for Far East Broadcasting Company. FEBC.org. There are videos, there are testimonies, there are maps. There's an outline of our North Korea project there for you. And we'd certainly encourage your listeners to pray for this brand new station that's, God willing, be on the air by the end of this year with 250,000 watts. Pray for, and if they feel led, to participate in prayer and engagement and even financial support, because this is a high leverage project. A few dollars is going to reach a lot of people that don't even know about Jesus.
That's phenomenal. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, anytime. It was a great privilege to be on with you, and thanks for all that you're doing in the ministry of Point of View.
We are grateful. Well, we have got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking a little bit more. We're going to open up the phone lines because there's a couple of interesting social science research articles that have come out that I think are going to be what I like to call breadcrumbs that are leading us back to the living bread. But we've got to take a break right now. But if you want to find out more information on those social science surveys or more, you can go to our website at www.pointofview.net. When you're there, you're going to find me, click on me. Don't worry, it won't get a bigger picture. It's going to send you straight to the daily briefing. And when it goes to the daily briefing, you're going to see some of these interesting articles that we've been talking about. Because even though it's not a Tuesday with the Millennial Roundtable, we're still going to be hosting this news you can use. And we're going to make it two segments. So we're going to be talking about it for 30 minutes. Because, and I'll give you a little hint before we go off to the break. It has to do with how much money the average American is spending to participate or to go to a wedding. It really is. It's very fascinating right now how much money, the increase in the amount of money that we're spending to go to weddings right now. And not only how much money we're spending to go to weddings right now, but the sheer number of weddings that are happening right now. There's some crazy statistics that I'll be interested to hear from you, as well as some research that indicates that there's great power in these rituals, that for those that have eyes to see can see that there's simply more going on than two people leaving their father and mother and cleaving to one another. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more from Point of View. But if you want to do one more thing for me before we go to break, you can go to the website at pointofview.net or the Facebook page, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We are coming on to the last stretch of Point of View, and we've got 30 minutes left, which means that we've got 2 segments, and we are going to extend. That's right. We are going to extend the news you can use. And so we're going to make it over 2 segments because I'm really interested. There's 2 in particular studies that came out that I'm really interested in talking about and trying to combat with you all, or not necessarily combat, discuss with you all. And so know that we're going to need you to call in because we want to hear from you. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Know that the topic of the conversation, how much guests actually spend at weddings. Okay, let's get to it. I've been teasing it for 2 hours now. So if it's a close friend or family member, according to a new Bankrate study, guests spend an average of $628 on wedding and pre-parties. That's right. You are spending, if you are a close friend or family member, you are spending on average of $628 on the wedding and pre-parties. For those in the wedding party, shell out even more. So if you are one of the, I believe it's 23 million individuals that are a part of a wedding party every year, you are spending on average $728. Costs for the more distant still aren't cheap. Wedding guests outside the inner circle spend an average of $372. So if you are a friend, but you're not necessarily in the wedding, you're going to spend upwards of $372. Does that seem like a lot of money when you consider going to a wedding? So that incurs the travel costs and maybe a hotel if you're staying in a hotel, or maybe it's an in-town wedding and you're just getting a gift. The average American is spending $372. If it's a close family member or friend, the average guest is spending $628. Well, you find out who your friends are. Tracy Lawrence sings it. Weddings, I guess, reveal it. And so let's look at some of the research behind this as well. But know that I want to hear from you. So you can call in. Does that seem like a lot of money? For the average wedding guest will spend $628 on a wedding and the pre-parties. Call in 800-351-1212. Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Let's hear from you. So each year, there are approximately 2.4 million weddings here in the U.S. The average wedding has 136 guests. At weddings, you shed a few tears, consume inordinate amounts of cake, and invest a couple of $100s. For Christians, you don't really spend money at weddings, but rather invest money. Weddings are like alarm clocks, awakening the soul to the sacred. Research reveals that power lies in rituals. They increase our perception of value, reduce anxiety, and increase confidence. That's according to the research. And so if we look at all 3 of those, why do we see that they increase our perception of value? Because we understand, for those who have eyes to see, that weddings are more than simply just 2 people leaving their father and their mother and cleaving towards one another. They're revealing the lengths that God has gone in order to be able to save his bride, the church. Now, how do they reduce anxiety? Well, rituals have been known to reduce anxiety. And so when we are watching a wedding, as we're watching this ceremony before us, one of the ways that this is going to reduce anxiety is it's a helpful reminder for us that God's not giving up on us, though we may give up on him. Of what we know from the biblical narrative, that he is faithful even when we are faithless, and so that should reduce anxiety. And also increases confidence. That you'll notice in the weddings, the male typically initiates the action. He's waiting for the bride to come down the aisle. He is the first one to offer up his vow. He is the first one to place the ring on his finger. He's the one initiating. We know that weddings are simply just shadows of the divine, of the glorious life that is Christ Jesus our Lord. He is the one that is initiating action towards us, and so that should increase confidence in us because we are not the first movers in this. Because you see, for those who have eyes to see, a wedding celebrates 2 people but points to one person, Jesus. We spend a lot for weddings, but weddings remind us that Jesus paid it all for us. So let's hear what you have to say. If it's a close friend or family member, guests are spending an average of $628 on wedding and pre-parties. those in the wedding party are shelling out $728 on average. Do you think that's a lot of money? Do you think that's not, that's kind of a low ball in your estimates relative to how much you're spending at weddings? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we'll try to share over air as well. And so let's go on to Georgia right now. We've got Derek in Georgia. Derek, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Derek. Whereabouts in Georgia are you?
Hazelhurst, Southeast Georgia.
Okay. Very neat. So, Derek, what's your point of view?
I certainly think that the amount of money that's spent on weddings, the weddings themselves, and the amount that is just.
Yeah. You there, Derek? Well, weddings are extremely expensive. I think Derek was getting to a point that the average wedding cost. Okay, so hear this, y'all. The average wedding cost is now $33,931. That we have increased exponentially the amount of money that's going into weddings right now. The reception venue on average is costing $15,000, photographers $2,600, wedding event planner $2,000, officiant $286. We have increased the amount of money. But one of the fascinating things is, and then when I was doing some research on this, is that even the jewelry is changing in value. Not simply because the wedding ring is increasing in value, but it's also the engagement ring as well. You're going to start to see a new trend, and I want you to know that you heard it here first. Men engagement rings. That's right. Men are starting to wear engagement rings. You have Ryan Reynolds in his first marriage, when he was married to Scarlett Johansson, first wore an engagement ring. And not only would the woman be able to wear an engagement ring to say that there's an individual that has put a ring on it, as Beyonce would say, but also the man to limit potential suitors that would be going after him as well. Michael Bublé also wore an engagement ring. Johnny Depp is another individual, a celebrity that wore an engagement ring. But it points back to what we're continuing to see in the culture today. Not only are weddings becoming more expensive, not only to put on a wedding, but also what we're beginning to see is weddings are more expensive, but also weddings are taking place longer after the initial engagement. That there were some studies that indicated that the actual length from engagement to the wedding is shifted past a year now. Individuals that are largely waiting longer and longer to be able to get married. But what this does point to is just the reality of what we know as those who have eyes to see, and see that this is more than simply just a ceremony that is taking place. That even though that it is costing more money to put on a wedding and to participate in a wedding, we know that cost is simply just a reflection. It's an investment in the reality that we are taking place in something sacred. It's awakening our soul to the sacredness, that we are more than just mere players and actors and actresses on a stage, but rather we are taking place in this divine play that's being orchestrated out before us. But that is the first segment of news you can use, but we're going to have to go to a break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about one other piece of information about news you can use as well, which I'm going to go ahead and tell you is a little bit disruptive to the status quo. Specifically, there was a new study that ranked the most disruptive office distractions. And so as you're listening to this potentially in your office place right now, or you are an individual that is keenly aware of the distractions that surround you right now, there was a study that was put out, a survey that was released of over 2,000 people. They ranked what is the most disruptive office distraction in their workplace. And so we're going to figure that out, and we're going to kind of overview that as well. But I'd be anxious to hear this from you. What do you think is your most disruptive office distraction that's taking place in your office place right now. And for those of you that are listening to Point of View in your office right now, please don't call in and say listening to you is very disruptive. That's the last thing that we want to happen. And so you can call in. I'd love to hear from you, because I think there's some interesting research that's showing that not every distraction is a bad thing as well. Interestingly enough, boredom can be a good thing at work. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to go through the list of the most disruptive distractions in the workplace. You can find out more information on this at our Point of View website, www.pointofview.net, or you can jump over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. If you have your hypothesis, your guess as to that, what is the most disruptive distraction, you can put that on the page, and we'll see if you were right or not. But we've got to go to a break. But when we come back from the break, the most disruptive distractions ranked right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, for this day of Monday, May 20th, 2019. Coming up on the last segment that we have together, we have been talking about news you can use, and specifically highlighting particular social science research and projects that have been put out. And there was one in particular that I was interested in a few weeks back, or rather last week, on the most disruptive office distractions. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know if you're an individual that likes to listen to a little bit of radio, likes to listen to a little bit of music, to kind of just a low hum in the background as you're making your way through the work day, or if you're an individual that needs complete silence as you are trying to do work. But they're over at Quartz, they published a list after a survey that they had put out of over 2,000 individuals that were offering up what is the most disruptive office distractions, ranked from worst to least worst based on the percentage of respondents who described them as causing moderate to high levels of distraction. I'm going to go ahead and tell you I'm a guy that can kind of put up with a lot when it comes to distractions in the office. I zone in a little bit. My friends have often made fun of me because I seem to be oblivious to my surroundings when I'm working at my desk or just working in a coffee shop. So I would not be that guy that would probably list something. But here is where we differ a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump to it, shall we? Let's go ahead and start at number 10. We've got pets in the office. And so individuals that have those little office pets apparently are somewhat disruptive. Coming in number 9, we've got table games. So table tennis, football, video games. These are characteristic of those millennial offices and those tech startups that have all that fun stuff going on when people are trying to work. Coming in at number 8, we've got visiting family members other than children. And so it's not, if you're bringing in, your Uncle Sam has come from halfway across the country, wants to see where little Johnny's working. Apparently, Uncle Sam is just very much a disruption to the office. Coming in at number 7, we've got team games across the office. I don't know about you, but I've got a little squishy ball that sometimes I like to throw in our office just to be able to let off a little bit of steam. Apparently, that is very disruptive. Coming in at number 6, visiting children. That's a fascinating one. Bring your kids to work day, more like bring no peace to, I don't know. I got nothing. Coming in at number 5, nearby group meetings. Fascinating. I'm the type of guy that if there's another meeting going on, I usually just kind of invite myself into that meeting. Maybe I can offer an outside perspective. I'm already lost. Coming in at number 4, though, office celebrations, birthdays, retirement, new babies. Who is putting office celebrations as a disruption? I think that person would be classified as the number 1 party pooper if he is putting for individuals that are putting office celebrations as a disruptor. Coming in at number 3, phone rings or alerts. That's fascinating because I don't trust people that have their phones on ringer. Like if your phone is not just on vibrate, if your phone is on ringer, I don't trust you. I think you've got character. No, I'm just kidding. I can't remember the last time my phone was on actual ring. Coming in at number 2, coworkers talking nearby. Now that's something there. I think there's something there, especially if they're talking about Game of Thrones. Only 19 million people just broke out. It said that it watched Game of Thrones. Only 19 million people. So in comparison, over 100 million people watched MASH in 1983 during their series finales as well. So coming in at number 1, though, and I will put an exclamation point behind this. Coming in at number 1, a coworker talking loudly on the phone. Oh, I think we can all agree and say yes and amen to that. When there is a coworker talking loudly to the extent that they probably don't even need the phone, they just need to open the window because they're talking at a decibel that is going to be able to register with the individual across town, that's when you know you've got a problem. 76% of respondents said that a coworker talking loudly on the phone created moderate, high, or very high level of distraction for them. So while lover boys working for the weekend, many of us are getting distracted learning about the plans of others, of what they're doing on the weekend. And so one study found that employees spend an average of 11 minutes on a project before getting distracted. So you spend 11 minutes and then you get distracted. Another survey found that the average employee loses 3 to 5 hours a day in interruptions. However, not all distractions are created equal. Some distractions generate great ideas. That it's often in boredom that we allow our minds to be able to wander. And when our minds wander, it typically will go into like a synthetic mode that it's putting together concepts that aren't necessarily congruent, but doing so in a way to help us to rethink problems that plague us in the work environment. It's fascinating. In our meritocratic world, we worship at the altar of efficiency. Instead of being known for our love, we yearn to be known for our busyness. And I think two things can be true at once. Is the reality, one, we should work heartily, especially as Christians, doing everything that the boss requires of us and the Father sets before us, according to Colossians 3:23 and John 17:4. But we should also look for the divine in the distractions. The person that's in the tree that is looking out at us, or the slight tug on our garment. Two instances that we see of Jesus doing that is seeing Zacchaeus in the tree in Luke 19, to feel the slight tug at the garment in Luke 8 from the woman that was bleeding. Distractions may take your focus, but don't let them take your heart, because it's often in the midst of the distractions that we find that our God is still working, though we may be temporarily not working on the project that was set before us. And that's been news you can use. And so thank you so much for joining us today. It's been quite a show. We've talked about it. We talked with Jonathan Saenz down in Austin as he was sharing with us from Texas Values some of the work that's going on as the legislature is coming to a close. Then we kind of jumped over and talked to Shapri LoMaglio at the CCCU and some of the work that they're doing to advocate on behalf of Christians in the public square, specifically with regards to the Equality Act, and continuing to be a strong, faithful voice for Christians in D.C. We transitioned over and talked with Wayne Pedersen of Far East Broadcasting. Wayne was telling us about some of the great work that they're doing in order to broadcast now a Christian radio station into North Korea, to where the typical radio station will broadcast anywhere from 50,000 watts. This radio station is going to broadcast 250,000 watts, hopefully reaching every one of the 24 to 25 million people in the Hermit Kingdom with the good news of Jesus. And so we have been talking about everything from down in Austin to all the way over in Pyongyang, and you can count me grateful. And so I want to thank so much Andrew as well as Steve that are behind us. But here's what you know. Kirby is going to be taking a little bit of time off over this next little stretch, and so you're going to be stuck with me. And so tomorrow I'm going to have my millennial buddies that are going to be around the round table with us, and we have got quite a show for you tomorrow. Specifically, I can't wait to talk about what's happening with the pessimism that is increasingly becoming a part of the American experiment among millennials specifically. They're operating out of a glass half empty mindset. There was a new research study that was put out by Deloitte that was indicating this, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll share more about the power of Robert Smith's gift to the class of 2019, the Morehouse College graduates. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as playing catch up. There's some key data points right now as we look at millennials as they're approaching. I know this is going to come shocking to many. As millennials are approaching middle life crisis, what are some of the data points that are indicating that the crisis is deepening? All that tomorrow on Point of View.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.